Or Samir, I want to begin by congratulating you, Samir, and thanking you very much for inviting me to be here with you in New Delhi. I remember, Samir, our conversation back in 2012, where you told me you were going to build an important venue in New Delhi for the world to come together. And indeed, you have outdone yourself. And I'm very proud to be here to see what you have done. And I will tell you that as somebody who runs a forum in Canada, Halifax International Security Forum, I ask, are you smarter now than you were when you arrived? And I can tell you, Samir, that I am much smarter now than I was when I arrived a couple of days ago, and I'm very happy, and congratulations. I also want to say that it's wonderful to be in this incredible country, India. I was here, I'm embarrassed to say, for the last time in 2004, but my I don't know, Samir, if you know this, my family lived here when I was very young. Both of my parents were journalists, and they lived here for 5 years. My father had the distinction of being kicked out of the country by one of your prime ministers, Indira Gandhi. And so it is wonderful. I grew up not only as a hearing in my family about India and how important India is to the region and to the world, but also while my mother was here, she learned how to cook Indian food, so I also grew up with Indian food, and it's just a privilege to be here. Halifax International Security Forum, the organization that I represent, is an organization based in Washington, D.C. that brings democracies together every year in Halifax, Canada, every November, to talk about increasing strategic cooperation among the world's democracies. Fundamental to the world's democracies is India, the world's largest democracy, and I'm very proud to have Indian participation at Halifax. Fundamental also to the world's democracies is Europe. And we are privileged here today to have a very strong panel of Europeans, all representing countries that are members of the European Union. Samir, you wrote in your remarks, but also you've said it a couple of times now over the last couple of days, that Europe, perhaps surprisingly, has become quite an interesting conversation. And so I see behind you Samir, the former Prime Minister of Sweden, who I hope will make an intervention today, as well as we talk about Europe. But I do note that I am not European. I am North American, and we are not in Europe. We are in New Delhi, India. And so I do want to start the conversation and bring it right down to basics. And then we're going to ask, beginning with the young fellows, we're going to open it up and really have the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists, so that people really do have an opportunity to get a sense, to have their questions about what is happening in Europe today. Because I do think that, as we talked about backstage, that it's very easy to dive down into a rabbit hole of the specific details of what is happening and maybe missing the forest for the trees. So we want to keep the conversation broad and bring it down to a specific level when we need to. So on our panel, I will begin introducing our panelists from my furthest right. My furthest right is Annette Ozalina, She is a professor of international relations and the head of the Department of Political Science at the University of Latvia. Her research interests focus on European integration, transatlantic security, regional cooperation in the Baltic Sea region, as well as foreign and security policy of the Baltic states. She is the author of more than 90 articles and editor of several books, and she has served as the director at the Advanced Institute of Social and Political Research at the University of Latvia. And we're very happy to have a representative from Latvia here today. Beside her is Matti Anttonen. Matti Anttonen is a Finnish diplomat and the present Secretary of State for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland for about 1 year now. Welcome. It's very important to have the Finnish voice on this panel. Beside him is Dr. Françoise Nicolas. She is a senior research fellow and director of the Center for Asian Studies at the French Institut of International Relations. She wanted me to know, and I will convey to you, that her area of expertise is not the inner workings of the EU, but to talk today about the EU's relationship with China. Beside Françoise is Péter Sztáray. Péter Sztáray is the Minister of State for Security Policy for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary. He started his diplomatic career in 1993 as a desk officer for NATO, and he later returned to NATO as Hungary's permanent representative to NATO. We're very happy to have a representative from Hungary with us today. On my direct right is Maritje Schaake. She is a Dutch politician and has been serving as a member of the European Parliament since 2009. She is a member of D66, part of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for the Europe political group. She is the coordinator on the International Trade Committee, where she is the ALDE spokesperson on transatlantic trade and digital trade. In 2016, she also served as the Parliament's rapporteur on a ban on trade for goods which could be used for capital punishment, torture, or other punishment. Schaake was featured by Politico as one of the 28 most influential Europeans in the class of 2017. She has been called the ultimate digital member of the European Parliament by Politico, and she has taken several initiatives to promote digital freedoms and to include them in EU foreign policy. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to begin with you.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was hoping you were not going to read the whole bio, so thank you for stopping right there.
My question to
Check
you...
it out online if you're really interested.
My question to you is, here we are in New Delhi, India.
Yeah.
There are a lot of questions about the future of the EU, or even perhaps the present of the EU. And what do you want our audience today to know about this situation in Europe and in the EU?
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here at the Raisina Dialogue. And we've heard in parts of the discussions already quite a bit about Europe. A lot of focus has been on migration. But I fear that there might be a bit of a risk that for people in India and people turning to the English language press, there could be a slightly biased notion of what is going on in the European Union. So let me use a simple metaphor to begin with. If you think of the governments of the member states of Europe as top soccer players, they need to have a little bit more of a team spirit. I think that is sometimes missing, but if we don't develop more of a team spirit between the governments of Europe, it will be difficult to compete or even win in the World Cup. And so I think we're in a transition of having been individual member states, obviously for a long time, seeking to collaborate on a number of issues that exceed the national level. Think of climate change, dealing with security and defense matters, but also digitization and all the kinds of topics that don't stop at the borders of countries. Now, I'm in the European Parliament. We will have elections for the European Parliament in May, and a lot has been written about the rise of populists, the rise of nationalists, and of course this is an important topic. but there's a lot of change in the political landscape that is broader than just the rise of populists. The Greens are doing pretty well. There's a lot of newcomers. Think about President Macron, who started a new movement that really swept the political stage out of virtually nothing and challenged the traditional French parties. In Spain, we see similar trends. So I think it is safe to say that there is a lot of dynamics. It makes for more choice for voters. They can be more directly represented by parties that represent even more specific parts of what they would like to see. It does make it challenging to predict what the next European Parliament will look like, and it also, this kind of fragmentation and ever more parties, can make it difficult both in national parliaments and in the European Parliament to come to broad consensus. For example, in the political center where I sit, I think it will be a case of working together between Christian democratic parties, social democratic parties, green parties, liberal parties, which is my political family, to make sure that we have a space for consensus, which is being challenged as such by a lot of the nationalists and populists, but also so that we can actually work on those solutions that I believe are so necessary. Competition with other global powers like China, a changing transatlantic relation. We truly need to have a stronger Europe to meet the challenges of our time. I think we can do it, but we need more team spirit.
I'm going to ask you a question that you might think is crazy, but I'm going to ask it in any case. Can you explain in 30 seconds what is the European Parliament?
It is a crazy question,
I
actually.
know, but I'm
Okay,
asking it
so the European Parliament is a direct representation of the European people. So it is a parliament that has representatives of each European member state proportionate to the population. And we sit together in what we call political families. So I belong to a progressive liberal party from the Netherlands, but on the European level, we work together with like-minded political parties in big, what we call political families. Now, if you put a magnifying glass over the family, you'll find a few sort of, stepchildren and difficult relationships in the family here and there. But all in all, we work together well in these families that are broad. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about how that makes for some strange bedfellows sometimes.
Thank you. Hungary, Peter, can you tell us here what you would like us to know from where you sit about Europe at this time?
Do I have to push it? No. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm very grateful for being part of this panel, and I'm very grateful for the hospitality of the Indian organizer. Thank you very much. So when I think about Europe, the first thing that comes to my mind is that this is the greatest integration scheme ever in the history of mankind, maybe. And it's a fantastic achievement, actually, that we are all part of in the European Union. We have to preserve this kind of achievements, and we have to respect the opinions of all member states, because consensus building needs a respect for the views of the others. And I think that's a fundamental part of this consensus building process. If you look at what has been achieved, I mean, just to take the Schengen Treaty, which allows Europeans to travel around in Europe without having a passport, just crossing the borders based upon an agreement among all the member states, or members of the Schengen Treaty at least, it's a fantastic achievement. If you look at the free flow of people, capital, and others, it's a fantastic achievement. There is also the single market, which would have been impossible 60, 70 years ago, and now it's a reality. So there are lots of positive aspects here. What we are facing now is a bucket or a couple of problems and a couple of challenges that have emerged in the past 10 years. Let's start with the economic crisis. I think that hit Europe without being prepared for such a very serious economic crisis. I take the things that happened 3.5 years ago, 3 years ago, which is a mass influx of people without control into the territory of Europe, which was a real challenge, and we have not yet found the common answer to that. And there was a big enlargement in the European Union. Countries from the eastern and central part of Europe joined this integration scheme, And of course, that needs an adaptation process, and this needs time, because we are many more now in the decision-making process. There are many more different views, and these views have to be harmonized somehow. So there are serious challenges, and I think we have to work on the consensus building, and we have to respect the sovereignty and the views of all individual member states. And if we can do that, I think it is possible to make further steps in that respect. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much. Françoise, from France, we were told yesterday by the Spanish foreign minister that Europe is made up of small countries, some of which don't yet know that they are small. I don't know if he was referring to France or not, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the French, what you want this audience to know from France at this time.
Well, first of all, let me thank the organizers, of course, for having me here and sharing my thoughts about the EU, even though it's not my area of expertise, but no problem. About the remark that was made yesterday about small states that don't know it and other small states that know it, of course I took it very personally. But I think that there is another small state that doesn't know it, and obviously this state will leave us very soon, apparently. And I think that after this state has left the Union, it will most probably regret it, because then it will feel that it is even more negligible, not to say small, worse than that. Okay, so my take on the EU and what is the EU all about and what is the takeaway that you should get from this session, since we start with the takeaways, which I think is a good approach. So what you should, I guess, remember from this session is that it is true that, first thing, the European integration was a very daring undertaking. It was absolutely crazy to think that something could be done at the EU level, at the time at the European Community level, at that time, to get all these countries together right in the wake of the Second World War was an absolutely crazy undertaking. But it proved to be extremely successful. And so this is something that should be kept in mind. Of course, it doesn't mean that everything is perfect, far from it. And if we look at the current situation, what we see is that the European Union is not in a very good shape. To be honest, it is faced with a number of problems, be they internal problems or external problems, or external challenges. Internal problems, well, a number of them have been mentioned. Brexit is one, of course, the rise of populism, the fact that the Franco-German couple, which used to be the major driving force behind the European integration process, is not in very good shape either. All these are true, real problems today. There are external problems, and again, we'll get back to that with the rise of China, the deterioration in the EU-US relationship, et cetera, et cetera. But my point is, don't despair. The EU is not in very good shape, but this is not a reason to despair. And the reason why I'm saying that is very simple. If you read, well, I guess you will never read them, one of the European integration founding fathers' memoirs, Jean Monnet's memoirs. In his memoir, he said something like, and it's a free quote, Europe will be forged in crisis, and it will end up being the sum of the solutions forged out of this crisis or adopted from this crisis. So it means that if ever Europe is in a difficult situation, it is precisely the right time for Europe to get its acts together and go forward. So it may be something of an exaggeration to say that this prediction has actually been proven right, but it's true that the European integration process has gone through a number of difficulties, and more often than not, these difficulties have actually led to progress in European integration. So here again, the European Union today is faced with difficulties, but don't get desperate. I think it will find the appropriate solutions to overcome these difficulties.
Françoise, thank you very much. Matti from Finland, and after Finland, we will hear from our friend from Latvia. And I just wonder, from Finland, close neighbor to Russia, if the view on today's Europe is influenced by your geography. But again, if you could let us know what you want all of us to know about Europe and the European Union today.
Thank you, and thank you for the organizers on organizing a panel on the European Union. Finland's way to the European Union was a rather long one, but we clearly wanted to go to this direction. We approved the membership in 1992 with a wide margin at the referendum, and the support for the membership is even stronger now. Why? First of all, in the global community, we are facing several major problems. Environmental, climate, trade problems, protectionism, all those things. We need somebody to speak for these things. We need somebody to take real action concerning climate, against protectionism, and I think the European Union is the best vehicle for that, and is doing its share, more than its share globally. In order to, to keep this union workable and doing these things, we have to also work for the internal workings, make it stronger and more kind of a vehicle for doing these things. We have to strengthen the internal market, and we have to make the European Union a more important provider of security for our people. And those two things are the center of our EU presidency latter half of this year. So I think the European Union's role globally will grow. Of course, we all understand that relatively speaking, the weight of the European Union is getting smaller population-wise, but I think we are doing our share globally on these major matters.
Matti, I asked a silly question earlier, and I'm going to ask another silly question now just because you've mentioned the EU presidency. Maybe you could explain what the EU presidency is.
As you know, we have 28 member states at the moment, 27 pretty soon. Every half a year, one of those member states will be chairing the European Union. Of course, we have kind of permanent, we have the head of the Commission, we have President of the European Council, but still the member countries are leading on many working groups and many constellations of Council of Ministers. So, kind of co-chair of the European Union for each country for half a year.
Thank you. Latvia. Zaneta is from Latvia, and of the panelists here, newest member of the European Union, and maybe you could tell us, same question, what do you want us to know about the European Union today from your perspective and maybe your country's perspective?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to organizers for inviting me and offering a floor to sharing some views on Latvia's perspective on the EU. First of all, Latvia is aware that it is a small country. We don't doubt this. And it is also one of the explanations why Latvia is so proud to be part of the European Union, and in this atmosphere of so many critical voices about the EU, Latvia is not among the most critical ones. And there are several reasons why public opinion support to the EU, despite all difficulties, in Latvia is growing. We used to be the most Euro-skeptical country. Now we are one amongst the most Euro-optimistic countries. And probably one of the reasons why this optimism is growing, because Latvians haven't lost the track of what EU is about. And EU is about peace. Latvia, which last year celebrated its centenary, looked backwards and realized from how many wars we have been going through and what were hardships of Latvian statehood and Latvian society. So the EU is a project which offers peace. The EU is security community, the title which was given by Karl Deutsch in 1957. And then he said that security community is community of people who difficult conflicts or misunderstandings, they solve in peaceful manner. They do not use violence. And this, for such a small country as Latvia, is of crucial importance. There is another one point which I wanted to mention. Despite a lot of difficulties, despite a lot of different opinions, there is a sense of partnership. So several of panelists already mentioned this integrationist philosophy. Integration is about partnerships. And even after joining the EU, Latvia faced several difficulties, like, for instance, financial crisis. But because of the sense of partnership and support and solidarity, Latvia got over this very difficult situation in relatively short time. Some countries are still fighting with the outcomes of financial crisis. And the third point which I wanted to mention, it's the concept of sustainability. But I do not use it in terms of United Nations framework, but more like sustainability of peace, sustainability of economic growth, sustainability of partnerships. It's a reliability and sense of future which will not be undermined by different risks and challenges.
Thank you. I'm going to invite the young fellows in the first instance to come to the microphone if any of them have questions for our panelists. And while they're doing that, I just will ask a question for each of you for really a one-sentence answer. And Françoise, you said that European Union is up for the challenge and that it's important for it to get its act together. It's my notes that I took. So starting at this side, does the EU know how to get its act together? Yes with a sentence, or no with a sentence, or something else, as we're preparing, yeah. I'm starting at the end, yeah.
I think yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Positive.
Can we expand a bit?
A little bit.
Beyond yes or no?
Yeah, and you'll have an answer. My guess
Okay.
is that there's going to be
No,
questions related.
Let me elaborate a little bit, because I just said that
Yeah.
in the introductory remarks, but I
Yeah.
would like to elaborate a bit. And this refers, of course, to China precisely. I mean, China is a real challenge for the EU. And there are two reasons why it is a challenge. First of all, the EU is, to some extent, divided by China. And I would like to preempt the remarks that will be made by our Chinese friends in the room, I'm pretty sure. What I mean by that, divided by China, I mean that China usually approaches its partners bilaterally. And as a result, by definition, the EU is not taken as an actor, as a homogeneous actor, but China is dealing with each individual state separately. And that may create tensions or frictions among the European countries. So that's what I mean, and there is one good example with this 16+1 grouping that China has set up, which is made up of 11 EU member states plus 5 other European states which are not part of the EU. And this is a clear example of some kind of divide and rule strategy. But I know that the Chinese won't like that, but I can respond to that if they have questions. The second thing is that the EU, is divided on China, which means that all individual member states do not see eye to eye on various issues associated with China. And this is the case for Chinese direct investment, for instance, and this is also the case for the famous Belt and Road Initiative. The European countries do not approach or do not accept these two things exactly in the same way. Some countries are very happy to welcome Chinese investment, some others are much more reluctant, and similarly for the Belt and Road Initiative, some of them are more than happy to accept projects as part of this Belt and Road Initiative, and some others are much more reluctant. So we have this division by China and on China, but the EU suggests, some measures taken by the EU recently suggest that the EU is actually finding a way of dealing with this division. First thing, on the Belt and Road Initiative, what we see is that the EU has launched recently the so-called EU-China Connectivity Platform, which is a European initiative on connectivity, which is more or less the same purpose as the Belt and Road Initiative, but with European characteristics. And the second point is on foreign direct investment or Chinese direct investment. On this specific point, the EU recently has also set up a screening mechanism, the objective of which is to maintain or preserve national security and to screen direct investment on the basis of security, national security considerations. And this is something that is done cooperatively, collectively, and these are examples of what the EU can do collectively in the face of challenges.
Thank you.
I was long, sorry for that.
That's okay. We'll cut you off later. Peter?
What was the question?
The question
How
is,
do you can get
and we'll go back to short answers because then we'll have questions, and they're waiting at the microphone. But the question is, does the EU know how to get its act together, and can it?
I think on the one hand, it's a never-ending story because it's constant harmonization of different views and interests, which is just normal. On the other hand, as I said, we achieved a lot until now. So let's, maybe it was inaudible, but it's a constant process of harmonizing the individual member states' interests and the views. So in that respect, I'm quite optimistic. One has to be careful not to shove aside any view and any particular interest, because then it will go to the detriment of unity. And I think that's very important. Avoid division, work together, and don't play down the views of some smaller countries or so.
I mean, your question already assumes that there is agreement on what it means to get one's act together. And there are fundamental political differences, as there are in any political, at least liberal democratic system. I mean, the Orban government propagates an illiberal democracy, which I don't know how those two can exist together, especially as the European Union is a liberal democracy. You spoke about the migrant crisis, but of the people that reached Europe, there are no migrants in Hungary, except maybe on the posters trying to scare people for migrants. And I think that we have to be clear about that. So I want to make a distinction between political views that can differ a great deal and the responsibilities that member states have in being members of the Union. I agree they can strive for their so-called self-interest, but there's also shared obligations. We cannot have a European Union succeeding where a country takes all the benefits, for example, 4 billion euros going to a country like Hungary in 2017, and not being willing to share the burden as agreed in the treaties. So I think there's a difference in the political fight over where the destination of the European Union is and the existing obligations that I believe must be met, because if I have to explain to my constituents why we would have to pay billions to a country like Hungary that's unwilling to take migrants as part of agreements in Europe, that's going to be very difficult.
Peter, very short response. Yeah.
Well, I think there are two points here. One is on liberal democracy. I think it's better to speak in general about democracy. You know, I was brought up in a country which was a communist country, and there everybody spoke about people's democracy, socialist democracy, and so on. And we are fed up with that. We want to have democracy without any label. I think nobody speaks about liberal democracy in the treaties, by the way. So the other thing is, and that's a kind of misunderstanding or misinterpretation, when we talk about the migrant crisis. Think about India having several 100,000 people, even 1 million, in 1 year, crossing through the borders without permission, entering the country, using the public spaces. not observing the laws of India, and then leaving, choosing another country where they want to settle down. Because this happened in 2015 in Hungary. Several 100,000 people crossed our border without any control. We didn't know who these people are. Most of them were economic migrants, of course. Nobody knows how many terrorists were in that big flow. And then they, by cherry picking, chose Germany, Sweden, whichever more richer Western, Northern European country. You know, we have an obligation under the Schengen Treaty that we have to control our borders. And now we are blamed because we do that. That is solidarity, that we protect our borders. And I think that's a very important point, because yesterday the Spanish minister spoke about Hungary as a negative example. Because we are observing our international obligations, that's the Schengen Treaty, we are protecting other member states who are now setting up internal controls within the Schengen zone, which is an achievement. But when they do that, then they destroy the Schengen Treaty. And I mean, the Spanish minister speaking about a fence or a wall, this is a bit ridiculous. They have 2 enclaves in Africa, which is surrounded by fences. So please, don't use double standards. And any country has the sovereign right to protect its borders and to protect other European countries, part of the Schengen Treaty. I think that's important.
I'm going to, I'm just going to use this exchange rather than, and I'm going to give you both an opportunity to continue it, but rather than talking about what you're talking about as an example of the European Union and some of the issues that go on within the institutions of the European Union and some of the conversations that are happening today. And with that, I'm just going to take some questions, and you're welcome to return back. I know that you're eager to respond. But we're going to take questions from the fellows at the microphone in the back corner.
Hi, I'm Amanda from Malaysia, working in the Philippines. My question refers specifically to economic development. So referring to the last statement earlier on sustainable economic development, if we look at the Eurozone specifically, the architecture for a complete economic and financial integration is somewhat incomplete. We have a monetary policy, we have structural reforms, but we only have a fiscal compact. You know, the Eurozone lacks what is a full fiscal union. So I would like to understand what is the current progress towards a full fiscal union to ensure that the next Euro crisis that we see that lands on the shores of the Euro area is not what we saw in the last decade or so and does not drag on for a very long time. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to take a few questions at a time.
Hello, my name is Julia Evert and I'm a German working for the UK Parliament right now. I would like to say basically...
Would you like to join the panel?
No, thank you. But we have heard a lot of sort of broad ideas as to what should happen in the EU, and we heard that team spirit would be needed between EU member states, but also differences have been mentioned and have just been shown among member states. So I would like to ask what would be some realistic and specific examples of how such team spirit could be reinvigorated. And I'm sure that Brexit alone is not enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
My name is Devashish. I'm an Indian and I work for Niti Aayog. My question is for the entire panel. You outlined the challenges, and one of the panelists was also part of the discussion yesterday where we talked about European Union's pursuit for power, prosperity, and peace. But given the setting, we'd really like to know what you think could be India's role in much more actionable items that could be pursued, that could help India, help EU achieve this pursuit for peace, power, and prosperity. Like, for instance, accelerating the process on the EU-India FTA. And so any recommendations on those, very specific recommendations would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Take 2 more.
Hi, my name is Akriti. I'm a young fellow from Austria, and I'm a lawyer by background. My question is also to the entire panel. I would like to know, the EU has historically done particularly well in those areas in which it had either exclusive competence or a qualified majority competence as it was supranational. So my question is, how likely is it that the EU buds away from unanimity requirements in some of those most crucial areas? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, my name is
No, we're still doing
So
fellows.
thank
We're still doing fellows, and then we'll
Okay.
do these in the next round. Yeah?
Okay, I think I'm the last one in this line.
Yes, I know.
Małgorzata Bonikowska from Poland, EU member state as well, Center for International Relations. We are one of the oldest independent think tanks in Poland. I used to work for the European Commission for 7 years. My question would be for the year 2019, which is a difficult year for the EU because we will have European elections in May. We'll have shift of power, we'll have changes, personal changes at the top jobs. We will have also Finnish presidency in the second half of the year, but Finland will have elections in April as well. So I wonder, the question would be, what could we expect in this very difficult year when the EU will be even weaker than is normally?
Okay, okay. So that's a series of 5 questions, and I would encourage our panelists not to feel the need for each of you to answer each of the 5 questions. But again, I'll go in this direction, starting here, just to address, and then we go, because we want to do one more round of questions as well.
Definitely. I mean, I was triggered by the last question suggesting that an election year is so difficult. I mean, you can also think about it as, you know, a very normal and healthy part of democracy where people's ideas and visions on Europe's role in the world, solving challenges together, such as, you know, migration and how to make sure we have a humane but also workable policy. These are the kinds of debates that people can engage with, and I certainly don't think it has to be difficult necessarily. Surely there's a lot at stake, and I think that for, you know, politicians like those belonging to progressive parties, there will be a big effort to get people out to vote. I think the people who don't come out to vote, young people especially, will be extremely important in these elections. So as these questions came from the young fellows, I encourage you all to participate in the political debate, to get out to vote and not allow people to stay at home maybe because it's raining or something. So I think elections are a celebration of democracy. Somebody asked what kind of opportunities are there for EU-India cooperation. Plenty. I believe the times are there in a changing world with rising global powers, also including China, to really lock hands and intensify partnerships between liberal democracies. But that also goes for trade, and I think we would be happy with more ambitions from the Indian government and authorities to actually negotiate with the EU on a trade agreement. I think I'll leave it there to give room.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Just briefly, I agree with Maritia that the election year is very good actually, and the European Parliament may gain some more legitimacy because last time there was a very low turnout actually. And that weakens the institutions, and I think that's bad. This time, the prediction is that it will be much higher because there are issues which are really in the forefront of the discussion, so I think it will be a very important and interesting European parliamentary election. But we will lose the UK, and that's the big problem. I think that's a loss to everybody. The UK was, I mean, I don't know, second biggest economy. It has a very strong military potential, so it's really a loss to us. And the view of the UK, I think, was a very balanced one on several issues discussed in the EU. So for us Hungarians or Central Europeans, this will be definitely a loss. On the decision making, we are a bit cautious on extending the majority decision making, because our experience is that when you're a small country and you have a particular interest, sometimes in the EU it's very difficult to pursue your interests because of the majority decision making. So on that we are cautious, and especially that goes for the common foreign and security policy. And finally, on EU-India, I think there was a great achievement last year in December when the foreign ministers of the European Union adopted a new India strategy. Now we can start work on that or continue work based upon that document, and I hope that India too will be more open for more cooperation, deeper and broader cooperation with the EU, because there can be lots of merits in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Françoise.
Okay, let me pick one question that was already addressed and another one that was not yet addressed.
Thank you.
So on the first one about 2019 being a difficult year, I think it's going to be a uncertain year. And this is reassuring, because if we knew the results of the elections in advance, that would be a really a very bad signal. So I think it's a good thing that it is an uncertain year. But of course, much is at stake, and this is a little bit of a problem. On the, I would like to try to respond to the question about the fiscal policy. The fact that the euro is accompanied by monetary policy, common monetary policy, but no common fiscal policy. This is indeed a problem, and this had been pointed out by a number of economists at the time of the beginning of the European Monetary Union. I remember that there was an article by Martin Feldstein, if I remember properly, in the late 1990s saying this will not fly because there is no common fiscal policy. And I'm afraid he had got it right. This is a problem. So initially we had the Growth and Stability Pact that was supposed to impose rules and constraints on fiscal policy in all individual member states. Now we went one step further with the Fiscal Compact, but this is not yet a common fiscal policy, and this is indeed a problem. Even if we have convergence, this is not really enough, and we will have tensions over and over again because of this lack of fiscal policy. But to have a common fiscal policy would mean to pool even more sovereignty, and currency is really a very sensitive thing. And so that was already dropped. Fiscal policy is about taxation. This is also extremely sensitive, and I think so far, at least, this would be going one step too far, I'm afraid. But so we are most probably in for more tensions.
Merci. Peter, Matti.
Yeah, on the elections, as was mentioned here, Finland will have elections as well in April. I can guarantee you that we will have a government after those elections. So don't you worry, we are ready to start the presidency 1st of July, and we will have a program. As I said, there is a rather broad consensus at home that growth, better internal market, more action on trade, plus then emphasis on foreign and security policy will be very much on the agenda also latter part of this year.
Thank you. Sanita.
I will pick up on some questions. I think that discussions on fiscal union represents exactly a good picture of diversities existing in the European Union. Those countries which are striving for more unity, they opt for introduction of euro, and they are there and then can enjoy different instruments provided by the EU. But those countries which decide to stay out of the fiscal union, it's their national choice. And this choice has to be respected because the European Union project is a project which is respecting diversities of different member states. And whatever push will be made into direction of more integrated and more countries joining fiscal union, it could create afterwards effect which could lead to other exits. Therefore, I think in total, member states and the EU as an entity is very cautious in pushing forward different initiatives which are not backed by member states. Another point which I wanted to make is about India's role in improving relations between the EU and India. I think already mentioned the new strategy is an excellent platform to put on the table those initiatives which both sides consider the most relevant ones. After adoption of the strategy, hard work on action plan definitely will follow, and already those priorities which are mentioned in terms of innovation, research, education, and other issues provide a very wide platform for further cooperation. But what should be taken into account that it would be, I think, very, very, very risky that the EU on its side will define and draft their own vision of the action plan, and India on its side will come up with their individual picture of how this strategy should be implemented. It's very important really to work jointly together on a plan which could be implementable and which could be beneficial for both sides. And there is such a term as more for more or demand-driven cooperation, so it's very important that the demand is there. And the last point which I wanted to make is about what to do to reintegrate Europe. I think it's very dangerous to put forward some political tools which mechanically promote more integration. So it's more like, again, the security community or societal and also political leadership, which to a very large extent is behind those new reintegration plans and models.
Thank you. We'll do one more round of questions. All of our panelists can see the clock ticking down and are aware of where we are with regard to time. So we're going to take questions, but if you could just introduce yourself, and then one sentence, and then a question.
Hello, thank you for a beautiful discussion. Very impressive.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
A little bit louder, please.
A little bit louder. I'm Ana Jovic-Lazic from the Institut for International Economics and Politics, which is based in Serbia, Belgrade. I have one question for all of you. How different challenges with which the European Union is facing now will affect its enlargement policy towards Western Balkans? And in that having that in mind, how achievable is a goal set by new Western Balkan strategy from February that this country can become EU members by 2025 if they fulfill our obligations set by agreement for stabilization and association? Thank you.
Can I ask you a question, if you don't mind?
How different challenges with which EU
No. I am asking, I'd like to ask you, a question.
Okay.
Which is from Serbia.
From Serbia, yes.
Yeah.
Western Balkan, Serbia. Europe, Western Balkan, Serbia.
No, please.
It's my location.
I know, which is why I'm
Belgrade.
Just go ahead.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Sorry.
The question is the following. Is the European Union an inspiring institution that you, from Serbia, want to join? It's a yes or no.
For me, yes.
Thank you.
I
okay,
speak
thank
in
you.
my own name.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Hello. This is Manish Kumar Jha. I'm a foreign affairs editor from Business World. That's an Indian magazine. My question to you, sir, of course, I appreciate the European Union has a lot of merit, but we do come across it is alleged it is too bureaucratic. The process takes a lot of time. We undermine the decision-making process. And for India, for us, it is a bad thing to hear from European Union. How do you explain that, the bureaucratic process? How does it undermine the decision-making process within the European Union? Especially the red tapeism is a word often used. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Did you catch that?
Yeah.
Okay. It's hard to see. Yes, please, at this microphone directly in front.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Anangsha Mitra. I'm from India. My question is, after Brexit, who is next? And if it happens, is there any possibility or probability to emerge some Dumburate players, maybe from the alumni of EU? And will it change or affect the present geoeconomic scenario or the regional geoeconomic scenario? Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to do here, we're going to do here, and then here, and that's it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Anirban, and every one of you have described the strategies of EU with India. I was just curious, after Brexit, if Brexit happens, and it will happen, do you think a European Union will have similar strategies for India? Or will Latvia, Hungary, Finland, France, Hungary, and Holland, for that matter, will have different bilateral strategies for India?
Thank you. And right here.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Brigadier Navjot from the Center for Joint Warfare Studies, Delhi. My question is, Shaki had beautifully explained that members of the EU are like players of a soccer team, need to play together in a coordinated manner. Now, some time back, US had imposed certain restriction on the use of IT and telecom products of a particular Chinese firm, while some of the nation states of EU have also followed suit, yet there are some which are not doing so. So does this imply that the EU is not on the same page on this issue? So if so, how does the soccer team play together? Thank you.
Thank you very much. These are all excellent questions, and I just want to thank all of you for your attention here today and for being here. And I want to thank the panelists. We're going to start at the end this time, and we're going to come this way. And keeping in mind, I'm not going to say anything other than there's a clock in front of you. Yeah.
Okay, I will start with a question on Serbia and enlargement. I think it's not so important to focus on what are EU challenges which could prevent the enlargement process. It's much more important to look at countries which are striving to become EU members, to what extent they really fulfill all commitments which they made signing up for EU membership. So if the accession process and negotiations will end up with a positive result, I don't see what so critical would happen in the EU that it would stop the enlargement process, particularly since this 2025 was already indicated politically as a commitment when the next enlargement could take place. So it's much more important to focus on country itself rather than what is happening in the EU. Probably if there will be more Brexits, which I don't expect, and I don't think, I even don't see a single country which would be in line on exit matters. But if we hypothetically project that there will be countries who exit, then believe me, your enter will be very quick, because then new members should be adopted. Another point about after the Brexit, whether partnerships and strategies will have to be negotiated, definitely not, because EU member states already committed themselves for the strategy, and they will proceed with policies and strategies despite one country leaving the EU.
Thank you. Matti.
I think the 2 years of the process of Brexit has shown that what kind of uncertainty this can then bring to one country. I don't think there will be many countries willing to experiment with this kind of ideas in the coming years. Then when it comes to Western Balkans, we have seen, at least from Finland, that the enlargement of the European Union has been a positive thing in our environment, positive thing for the European Union. It's very important to fulfill the EU membership criteria. And then something which should not be forgotten, that already the free trade agreement which Serbia has with the European Union is bringing many of the economic benefits to Serbia at the moment.
Thank you. Françoise.
All right, I realize I have to be extremely brief. Time is running. So two points about the different approaches taken by various countries towards China. Well, this is the case indeed, and the European countries are not all on the same page, and this is a problem. As I indicated earlier, there have been progress pushing the countries to be on the same page, but this is not yet the case on 100% of the cases. And so this is a problem where progress still needs to be done. And on the Brexit issue, well, I think that we have to wait until Brexit is really completed. And I guess, as was said earlier, that will discourage some other potential candidates to go the same way.
Thank you. Péter.
Thank you. On Serbia and enlargement, I can assure you that we give our very strong support to your enlargement, to your accession to the EU. We look at it from a geopolitical or strategic point of view. We need a strong and stable and peaceful Western Balkans, and enlargement is one of the best tools to get there. So support for Serbia. And the other thing is that after Brexit, my very clear and strong expectation is that there will be nobody after the UK leaving the EU, because the UK is a very special case in that respect. There will be more countries who want to join the EU, and that's the prediction and the expectation. And on China, I wanted to come back. Of course, there are different views on how far we should go in our cooperation with the Chinese. But I think there is also kind of hypocrisy here, because many countries, rich European countries, have very deep, very broad, and very close cooperation in economic terms and in political terms with the Chinese, but they don't talk too much about it. Some others, like the 16+1, I think, we are much more open on that, And we say that, yes, on a pragmatic basis, we can have some good cooperation, but this is our sovereign right to do so. And I think it's not a very divisive issue anyway.
Thank you, Peter. Maritja, the final word is yours.
I wanted to tell you a little story, and that is that yesterday in Amsterdam, the first casualty of Brexit, the European Medicines Agency, was officially opened. It was relocated. And the Netherlands got this European institution out of 19 competing countries. This European Medicine Agency certifies and tests new medicines and looks at innovations in the medicine field. And there's 850 experts working there. So do we consider them the bureaucrats in the European institutions that some people talk about in sort of abstract terms, or are these people simply fulfilling a role that's part of an internal market where we want to have labels that make sure that medicine is safe for people and that we have cutting-edge, innovative solutions for people's ailments, right? So I think this really makes it much more tangible what people mean when they talk about these bureaucrats in the institutions. And now that we're talking about Amsterdam, people from Amsterdam, where I'm from, don't really like talking about Rotterdam. But in this example, I'll do it. It's another city in the Netherlands, because the amount of bureaucrats that work for the European Union are fewer than work for the city of Rotterdam. And maybe during the coffee break, somebody can tell me how many people work for the city of New Delhi. I would be very, very interested. But before we end, I wanted to mark on a very positive point that I take away from this panel, and that is that Peter, my neighbor, said that the adjective to democracy is not that important. And if that means that the Hungarian government will no longer propagate illiberal democracy, I think we can end on a very high note despite our political differences.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I appreciate the panel. If we could have a round of applause for everybody.